Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on.
Oddity at the Caravan Park by Velour Fog. Back when I was 18 years old and went for a bit of a road trip from Melbourne down to the east coast to Eden. Well, all was great for the first 4 days or so till I got to Eden. I checked into the caravan park there and was directed up the back to the non-powered camping sites. There was one bloke there setting up his tent and just another sitting in his Valiant station wagon, in the driver's seat, just staring straight ahead. After setting up my tent, I got chatting to the other bloke with the tent, and after a few brews, we headed into town to the pub. We left at closing and went back to the caravan park for a few more brews. And as we were getting closer to our tents, I noticed that the other bloke that was just sitting in the Val earlier was still sitting there, in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead intently. No camping gear to be seen. So we pulled up to the other bloke's camp to continue where we left off from the pub. After a beer or two, he asked if I minded if he rolled up a special cigarette for himself. I said go for it. So we went into his tent and came out about 30 seconds later, looking a bit shitty. "What's up?" I asked. "Some bastard has been in my tent while we were out and stolen my last bit of dope," he replied. Not really knowing or caring if he was full of crap, I just replied, "Shit, that's no good." We went back to drinking when 10 minutes or so later, Mr. Weirdo from the Val just walked straight past us and into this guy's tent and just stood there. We were both a bit stunned by this, and it took us a few seconds to react. There's no real need to type what was said to the weirdo by the tent owner, but you can guess. So the weirdo walked out of the tent and just stood there again. This time the bloke directly accused the weirdo of stealing his dope while we were at the pub. Mr. Weirdo just walked back to his car and came back with a shopping bag in his hand. It was full of dope, and he gave it to my drinking partner and then walked away. "Holy shit," I said. "You leave that in your tent?" Now my drinking partner was looking as shocked as me. "No," he said. "I only had enough for a couple of scoobs. This isn't mine." So we were both reeling in shock from this. Who knows where that weirdo got that from? That ended night 1 in Eden. Night 2. After what happened the previous night and waking up in the morning to see Mr. Weirdo still sitting in the driver's seat staring straight ahead, I thought it would be prudent to take my gear out of the tent as I was going out sightseeing for the day. When I got back that evening, I noticed that the pole on my tent was very bent and the zipper to my tent was open. I certainly did not leave it open, so after straightening my tent back up, I marched right over to Mr. Weirdo, who as usual was just sitting in the driver's seat of his Val staring straight ahead, and I accused him of going in my tent while I was out. He just looked at me all confused and then started staring straight ahead again. By now I was thinking that I should have just gotten the hell out of there right then, but by now it was too late to get to anywhere else. I wandered to the pub again, and my companion from the night before had packed up and left that day, so I was on my own. I stayed till closing and headed back to camp, got my bedding out of the car and set it up. I was feeling mighty uneasy about Mr. Weirdo, who was just still in his car as usual, staring straight ahead. I thought I ought to be on the safe side, so I put a knife with me next to my sleeping bag, but of course the only knife I had was for filleting fish. Off to the land of Nod I went, when at what time I don't know, I heard the zipper on my tent being opened. By the time it got to halfway open, I was wide awake, standing up with a knife in my hand. And there was Mr. Weirdo, standing there with just a shirt on. Yeah, you heard that correctly. Just a t-shirt and nothing else. And it was a short t-shirt as well. Once again, folks, there's no reason to type what I said to him. You get the idea. Mr. Weirdo retreated back to his trusty Val, where he just sat in the driver's seat as usual, staring straight ahead. Naturally, after that, there was no going back to sleep. But it didn't matter. Mr. Weirdo was not finished yet. After about half an hour after the more or less naked man incident happened, the yelling and arguing started. I wasn't involved in this, folks. It was Mr. Weirdo yelling at people who weren't there, and he was having full-blown arguments with them. It was very bizarre, to say the least. Once sweet daylight returned, I packed up my gear and got the hell out of there. And what was Mr. Weirdo doing then, you ask? Well, the same as he'd always been doing. Just sitting in the driver's seat of that Val staring straight ahead. And that ended my little sojourn to Eden. My Forest Horror Story by Zealous Ideal Draw 715. This was in the summer or near fall of 2022. Me, my 19-year-old non-binary, and my dad took a trip to Oregon for a camping trip in memorial of my godfather. For context, my godfather was my aunt's husband, and he died the same time in 2021, and we had a funeral in Oregon, but it was essentially ruined when the guy we chose to speak for it implied my godfather was in hell, and tried to turn us all to Christianity, or else we would all end up like him. So we decided to have a second one that was smaller and more intimate with less than half the amount. Mostly family, and it was going to take place at a campground where my godfather and aunt went many times and had fond memories there. From Denver to Oregon, my dad and I flew and stayed at my aunt's for a few days before making the trip to Lewis and Clark Park in Washington, close to Oregon. We met up with another group of my family from Maui and Idaho. I remember the drive up. It was through a bright green thick forest that made me nervous being so far from anything, but I guess that's the charm, too. I hadn't been camping for a long time, so after helping put up the tent and a good meal, I asked my dad for a White Claw, which he granted. I only had one, though. After a while, I felt good and chaotic, so after dancing with my younger cousins, it got dark and me and one of my closer cousins, who was 14, went off into the forest to summon demons. Okay, you might be thinking, what the fuck, but look, I don't actually believe in demons, and I didn't think it would work. It was just to be scary and rebellious. So we sat down in a small clearing near a path where my cousin took a Bath and Body Works candle out, lit it, and put it between us. I began mystically waving my hands over it and spouting gibberish I reckoned was similar to chanting. We had a good laugh, then moved on and went back to the site. Later in the night, when everyone else went to sleep, me and my cousin decided to summon demons, but be more real this time. I looked up a demon summoning spell that had a good-looking Latin chant, and even though we had none of the materials except the candle and a hot dog bun to sacrifice, we still spoke the chant and burned the hot dog bun. After nothing happened, we shrugged it off and just went to talking. We talked about anything and everything for hours until I started feeling really bad. I can't really explain it well. It was like anxiety, the kind where it feels like a weight is in your stomach and it's harder to breathe. I felt like we were being watched, which was fair since we were surrounded by dark, dense forest. I began flashing my light around, not exactly looking, but looking to make sure that something wasn't there. My cousin picked up on my fear and looked around too, and now we had two beams of light pointed into the forest. I began to feel a little better as there was nothing immediate happening, until I pointed my flashlight up. That's when I saw it. A creature. Pale white, maybe gray, with dark, void-like eyes staring at us, perched like a monkey on a high branch in a spruce tree. I froze. I went through everything in my mind. Was this because we summoned demons? We didn't even do it right. Was this some kind of animal? It couldn't be. It looked too humanoid. It looked exactly like those skinwalker pictures you can find on creepy forums. But it was right there, in front of me. Was I hallucinating? Again, I have been known to hallucinate, but I never had before so vividly. And then I remembered my cousin. If he saw it, then it was definitely real, and I wasn't hallucinating. So I told my cousin to look up where my flashlight was pointing, and they froze, too. "You see that?" I asked. I can't remember exactly what my cousin said, but it was something like, "What is that? It looks like a demon." Still, I needed more proof they were seeing the same thing. "What color is it?" I asked. White, they said. That was more than enough for me. We began to rush away, taking the candle and running to the area where the tents were. I looked behind me and saw the figure was now on the ground, standing tall, at least 5 feet. Tall and skinny. Every time I looked back, it would seem to stop, but when I would look again, it would be standing closer, making its way to us. My group and her group had set up tents on different paths on the campground, far enough where I felt like we could make it if we ran and didn't look back. I stopped my cousin where our paths diverged and told her to run straight to her tent after we counted down 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, I said, and ran to my tent and didn't look back. I made it to my tent and accidentally woke up my father, who said, "What are you guys doing? You're keeping the whole camp up." But I didn't want to elaborate. "I'll tell you in the morning," I said. I climbed into my sleeping bag. Then and there, I felt okay. I was now surrounded by family, and surely nothing would get me with them around. I texted my cousin to make sure they got back, and they did, so I settled for the night. But I didn't get right to sleep. My uncle scared me a bit when he got up to go to the bathroom, and for the whole night I kept hearing this noise right outside my tent. It was like a small animal was digging and fumbling around, and whenever I would move, it would go away. It was right near my head, and it was scaring the shit out of me, but I eventually got to sleep when it mostly stopped. I woke up the next morning and almost immediately headed back to the fire pit where me and my cousin and I were when we saw the figure. It was bright out, so I figured I could look in the space I saw and could figure out if it really had been an animal or maybe some kind of bird nest. But I didn't see anything like that. In fact, what I saw was almost a clearing on the exact branch it was on, like something big had been there. When my cousin woke, we confirmed we saw the same thing in the same spot. So what do you think? Was it some kind of skinwalker creature from the forest? Did we accidentally summon a demon with our bogus ritual via a hot dog bun? Did we both hallucinate the same thing? Or was it an animal? I guess we'll never know. Trip Gone Awry by Champ GX. Every year we have our big summer trip over summer break, whether it's camping or going to the beach, which is what all of them have been so far. So I somewhat wish for a different kind of vacation. Anyway, I had my brother, sister, one of my uncles, my grandpa, my mom, and my mom's boyfriend, so it was kind of a big deal. We decided to go camping at Cumberland Falls, and we had the best view out of all the trips we've ever had. We had a spot in the corner surrounded by trees, so we had plenty of firewood, which was mostly dry, and looking down the hill you could see the falls, and I was so excited to swim in those falls. The day was pretty good in itself. We had sandwiches, took some hikes, and of course cooked marshmallows over the campfire and turned them into s'mores. We set up camp and started settling in when my brother went to the restroom with my mom's boyfriend to take him there. He was quite young at the time. So as my brain started settling down and powering off, I heard a blood-curdling screech from beside my tent. I was mostly undisturbed as I am a rock when I sleep, so I did continue to sleep. Then my sister rushed into my tent and almost yelled with worry and fear, "Wake up! Your brother's been bitten by a snake!" I sleepily mumbled and headed outside, which sure as hell woke me up. My brother was on the ground and clenching his foot, crying. My brother is a pretty whiny person, and he would cry so annoyingly all the time over the littlest things. But this cry, oh boy. It was shaky like he was cold, but tense like he was doing curls, as well as his whole body vibrating in pain. There was a snake slithering around on the ground, and my mom's boyfriend was trying to stomp it out. Unfortunately, he was foolishly wearing sandals, and the snake bit the side of his foot as he cussed at it. My grandpa then came and smashed it with his steel-toe boot. The campers beside us started coming to our campsite, wondering what the heck was going on. My mom was already comforting my brother, panicked, while my mom's boyfriend was dialing 911 for an ambulance. We showed the neighbors that had come over the snake's corpse, and one of them said that it was a copperhead, which, for those of you that don't know, is the most venomous snake in Kentucky. Then our panic went from 1,000 to like 100 million as we heard that it was also a baby, which means that they can't control their venom output. So my brother got a megadose while my mom's boyfriend got an itty-bitty dose. All we could do was wait for the ambulance and comfort my brother. As this was kind of an actual life-threatening experience for him. The ambulance came after 10 or 15 minutes of horror and brain-scrambling madness, and my mom, brother, and my mom's boyfriend were trucked off to the ER. It was hard to go to sleep after that, especially with my sister crying in the background. We woke up bright and early, and I realized we would never swim in Cumberland waters. We packed up in the morning and headed home. We had a day or two of just worrying that my brother and my mom's boyfriend were okay, and finally, they both came home. They were both fine, thankfully, although my brother had severe swelling for a couple of days and had to be on a walker for about 4 because of it. But he got anti-venom and is fine, as well as my mom's boyfriend, who had less severe injuries and walked out the day after. Like I said, they're both fine now, but man, that was a scary experience. I Know What I Didn't See by Anonymous. Until this happened, I did not believe or accept the existence of a large bipedal animal running around in the woods. My husband and I are long-distance hikers and have twice spent 6 months sleeping in the wilderness in a tent hiking from Mexico to Canada. On this day, we were hiking in an uninhabited part of Trinity County, California. We both heard an unfamiliar animal or bird call, and I was the only one who saw anything when I looked for the source of the sound. What I saw was an animal licking water from the opposite bank of the creek, about 20 feet below me and about 30 feet away. No ears were visible, just a round black head. The animal sensed me and looked up. When it did see me, its eyes widened in fear, and its call changed to one of fear. This thing began running on all fours, on hands and feet with knees bent. It went straight up the steep hill, trying to stay low and hide. As it ran, it first went to the left, then doubled back towards the right, kind of making a Z. I was in shock but still hiking and trying to catch a glimpse and figure out what I was seeing running on the opposite bank and mountainside. My view was partially obstructed by fir trees and debris. Suddenly this thing just went straight uphill, went upright on 2 legs, and ran quickly straight up the mountainside. I kept walking and now had a clear, unobstructed view of its back. It had short, black hair, and it was tall and skinny. The legs were about 4 feet long and thin, and I couldn't see any penis or testicles visible. It had a round head and no visible ears. It ran like a human, fast and swinging arms all the while, fearfully calling out to another one I couldn't see. This occurred about 1.5 miles from my home, and the next 2 nights, I was awakened at night by a foul smell. I want to point out that this area where this occurred is basically 175 miles of uninhabited forest, steep terrain, some meadows and streams with elevations from 500 feet to above 6,000 feet. The trail we were hiking is private. It's one we maintain and is only used by us. Usually we are gone in the summer months, but in 2020 we were home due to COVID. I know what I didn't see. This was not a bear, deer, or elk, all of which are common to the area. I spend a tremendous amount of time hiking to stay in shape and am presently training to hike the AT. We are both familiar with local wildlife and have never heard this animal before or since. After a great deal of thought, I am now of the opinion that it was a young female being given the opportunity to go alone and get a drink. She was calling out her location when we heard her calls. There were about 6 of them. When she saw me, she was terrified and ran back to her parents, crying out the way any child would. I'm a mother and instinctively recognize that kind of cry. This animal exhibited both human behaviors and emotions, but looked like an animal. I am 100% convinced that the foul smell I was smelling in the evening hours and at night was her parents. But it is unnerving to know that they came to look for us. They had tracked us back to our place to see if we were that threat. I hope they know that we're not. Bear by Igor B. Backpacking in Yosemite National Park, we were crossing over the bridge above Nevada Falls. That's the high one. Vernal is below. There was a big crowd of people across the bridge, and we pulled up at the crowd and saw a black bear approaching the crowd and the bridge. It was obvious that the territorial bear wanted to cross the bridge, and the thing to do is, you let it. We moved away from the crowd, hoping to serve as an example for them to do the same. Clear the path and let the bear go on his way. No such luck. The crowd of tourists gave the bear wide berth, but stayed a lot closer than we were. The bear slowly approached, needing to cross the bridge but wary of the big crowd of people, maybe 20 of them in all. As the bear approached the crowd on the paved pathway, out came the cameras and people began to move in toward the bear to get photos. Soon after, though, the crowd was surrounding the bear, completely encircling it. Not 3 feet away, but maybe in a ring about 30 feet around. Could have been 40 feet, but still close. My buddy had just remarked what idiots these people were to surround a wild animal, when the bear bolted toward the bridge, taking off like a shot. People began screaming and running in every imaginable direction. The bear charged right for the bridge. Unfortunately, it just so happened that a young girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, happened to be the closest to the bridge when the bear charged, and panic ensued. In startled terror, the girl turned and ran toward the bridge. The bear raced across the bridge, bounding toward the terrified, screaming child. This is a bridge maybe 6 feet wide, and the bear is not much more narrow. I knew for certain that fat bear was going to knock that precious little girl right off the bridge into the water, and she was going to be carried over Nevada Falls to her tragic death. My mind froze as I watched the bear overtake and then pass the little girl. It was surreal watching it, as the girl then began to chase the bear. In her terror, she didn't even know what she was running from, and she just kept running in the same direction as the bear. For a minute there, I knew in my heart that child was dead, swept over the falls. And then suddenly she wasn't. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. It was something right out of a cartoon. In 1 minute, a large black bear was chasing this tiny little blonde child across the bridge, and in the next, there she is chasing the bear across the bridge. Like I said, it was right out of a cartoon. All is well that ends well. But I was furious at the stupid tourists and especially the girl's parents. It's stupid enough to get close to a bear, but to surround it, leaving it no escape? My God, what idiocy. I don't believe people are inherently stupid, but smart people can sure be capable of making the worst decisions at the worst possible time. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on my podcast and this channel, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. As always, I read them all. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Hit the button for notifications for every time I upload. And if you'd like to take your support even further, you can find me on Patreon. A link to that is in the description below, along with all of my social media links. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.